Humiliated by the millionaire, the old man accepted the challenge in front of everyone. But when the horse reacted in an unexpected way, all eyes turned to the rich man, who was left speechless. The gray light of dawn crept through the cracks of Miguel Ramirez's weathered trailer, falling across his face like ghostly fingers. He opened his eyes before his alarm clock could sound, a habit formed over decades of rising with the sun. 58 years had etched deep lines around his eyes and mouth, marking not just age, but a particular kind of weathering that comes from a life lived outdoors, at the mercy of elements both natural and human. His calloused hand reached for the small wooden frame on his nightstand, touching it with the reverence of a daily ritual. The photograph inside was faded now, the colors washing away like memories sometimes did when you tried too hard to hold them. Elena's smile remained radiant despite the photograph's decay, her arm wrapped protectively around little Lucia, both forever frozen at 33 and 9 years old. "Buenos dias, mis amores," he whispered, the words hanging in the still air of the trailer. 7 years had passed since the land dispute that had taken them from him. 7 years since he'd fled north with nothing but their photograph and the skills his father had taught him. Sometimes the grief felt as fresh as yesterday. Other times it seemed like something that had happened to someone else in another lifetime. The floor creaked beneath his weight as he moved through his morning routine with mechanical precision. The trailer that Whitman Acres provided for its stable hands was little more than a metal box, with patches of mold climbing the corners and a perpetually leaking roof that nobody ever came to fix. The sink sputtered brown water for several seconds before running clear enough to splash on his face. Miguel didn't complain. Complaining was a luxury for those who had options. Outside, Tennessee morning fog hugged the rolling pastures of Whitman Acres, one of the most prestigious horse breeding facilities in the South. The contrast between the immaculate white fences surrounding the property and his dilapidated trailer was not lost on Miguel. Beauty and care were resources distributed selectively here. "Morning, Mexico," called Jackson, the American stable manager, as Miguel made his way toward the main barn. "Feed and mucking first, then we need the training paddock raked before Mr. Whitman brings some investors by." Miguel nodded silently. His name wasn't Mexico, but he'd stopped correcting Jackson years ago. Names, like complaints, were privileges he couldn't afford to insist upon. The morning unfolded like hundreds before it. Miguel moved efficiently from stall to stall, shoveling manure into a wheelbarrow, refreshing water buckets, distributing measured portions of grain and hay. The horses recognized him, some nickering softly as he approached. With them, at least, his identity wasn't reduced to his country of origin. "My grandfather used to say that horses remember everything," his father had told him when Miguel was just a boy, watching with wide eyes as the older man gentled a nervous mare. "They know who treats them with respect and who sees them as machines." Miguel had absorbed those lessons alongside practical skills. How to read a horse's ears and eyes, how to approach from angles that didn't trigger flight responses, how to listen with the heart rather than the ears. In Mexico, these abilities had earned him respect. Here, they merely qualified him to clean stables and perform tasks that no one else wanted to do. "Miguel, ¿ya viste al demonio?" Carlos, one of the few other Latino workers, had joined him in the feed room. "They say Mr. Johnson almost got his chest crushed yesterday." Miguel knew immediately which horse Carlos was referring to. Thunder, the $2 million black thoroughbred stallion that had once been Charles Whitman's pride and joy, had become the farm's most notorious resident after attacking multiple handlers. "I heard," Miguel replied simply, measuring out grain. "They're saying Mr. Whitman might put him down if he can't be fixed," Carlos continued, lowering his voice. $2 million, man. Can you imagine? Before Miguel could respond, the unmistakable sound of expensive tires on gravel drew their attention. Through the feed room window, they watched a procession of luxury vehicles approach the main house. "Investors," Carlos muttered. "Better finish up quick. You know how Mr. Whitman gets when he spots Mexicans during his tours." The two men worked faster, completing their morning tasks just as voices approached the main stable. Miguel slipped into an empty stall, busying himself with spreading fresh straw while Charles Whitman's booming voice filled the space. "Gentlemen, what you're looking at is over 15 million in horseflesh," Whitman announced proudly. "Every animal here is championship quality." Miguel didn't need to see Charles Whitman to picture him. In his early 60s, with artificially white teeth and a permanent tan, Whitman had made his fortune in Texas oil before deciding that Tennessee horse country offered better political connections for his Senate aspirations. He wore custom boots that had never seen real work and spoke about horses exclusively in terms of their monetary value. "What about that one you were telling us about, Charles?" asked one of the visitors. "The black stallion that won at Kentucky last year?" A momentary silence fell, and Miguel could almost feel Whitman's discomfort from where he stood. "Thunder. Yes. Well, there's been a setback with that particular investment." Miguel crept closer to the aisle, careful to remain out of sight while the group moved toward the isolated stall at the far end of the barn. Thunder was kept separate from the other horses now in a reinforced stall with warning signs plastered across the door. "What happened?" another visitor asked. "He witnessed his previous trainer get crushed against the fence during an exercise," Whitman explained, his tone suggesting an inconvenient business development rather than a tragedy. "Since then, the animal has become unmanageable, attacks anyone who enters with a whip or spurs." Miguel peered around the corner, watching as the men approached Thunder's stall. The magnificent black stallion stood in the darkest corner, ears pinned back, eyes wide and vigilant. Even in his agitated state, Thunder's beauty was undeniable. 17 hands of powerful muscle, coat gleaming like polished obsidian despite his distress. "This animal is now a walking liability," Whitman continued, gesturing toward the stall without getting too close. "I've brought in the best trainers in the country, and they all say the same thing. He's broken inside." Miguel felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Broken inside. The words could have described so many beings: horses, people, dreams. "Shame," commented one of the investors, peering cautiously at Thunder. "What will you do with him?" "If he can't be fixed within the month, I'll have to cut my losses," Whitman replied with the cold calculation of a man discussing a failed stock investment rather than a living creature. The tour continued, voices fading as the group moved toward the training arena. Miguel remained still, his eyes meeting Thunder's across the distance. The stallion's gaze held no madness, despite what everyone claimed. Miguel recognized what lived in those dark eyes, not insanity, but profound fear transformed into the only defense available. "You're not broken," Miguel whispered in Spanish, too softly for anyone to hear. "You're just speaking a language they don't understand." That evening, the Whitman estate blazed with light and music. Charles Whitman's birthday celebration had drawn the upper crust of Tennessee society, their luxury vehicles lining the curved driveway leading to the mansion. From his trailer, Miguel could see the distant figures moving behind tall windows, champagne glasses catching the light like stars. His night rounds began at 11, after most of the stable hands had retired to their quarters. Miguel preferred the solitude of these late shifts, when he could work without Jackson's constant criticism or Whitman's dismissive glances. In the quiet darkness, the barn became a different world, one where his presence wasn't an inconvenience but a comfort to the animals who recognized his footsteps. He saved Thunder's stall for last, as he always did. The black stallion was particularly agitated tonight, perhaps disturbed by the unusual activity and noise from the main house. Most workers hurried past Thunder's stall, dropping hay and water quickly before retreating from the dangerous animal. Miguel never showed fear, though he maintained a respectful distance. Tonight, however, something made him pause. Perhaps it was the way Thunder paced, or the moonlight streaming through the high windows, painting silver stripes across the black coat. Instead of continuing his rounds, Miguel set down his water bucket and lowered himself to sit on a bale of hay several feet from the stall door. From his pocket, he withdrew a small, battered book, Pablo Neruda's poetry, its spine cracked from years of reading. It had been Elena's favorite. "Mi abuelo me dijo una vez que las palabras pueden curar," Miguel said softly, not looking directly at Thunder. "My grandfather once told me that words can heal." The stallion's ears flicked toward the sound of his voice, though he remained in his corner, watchful and wary. Miguel began to read, his voice low and melodic. He read about salt and stone, about love and longing, about the sea that connects all distant shores. He read in Spanish, the language of his heart, the words flowing like a gentle stream through the otherwise silent barn. For nearly an hour, only Miguel's voice existed in the space between them. When he finally looked up from the pages, he found Thunder watching him with intense focus. The stallion's ears were forward now, his posture still alert but lacking the aggressive tension from before. Thunder took a hesitant step forward, then another, drawn not by food or force but by the simple cadence of words in a language that had never been used to give him orders or inflict pain. Miguel remained perfectly still, allowing the horse to decide how much distance to close. There was no hurry, no expectation, just the mutual recognition of two beings who had each carried their own burdens of loss. When Thunder finally stopped his approach, still several feet from the stall door, Miguel closed the book gently. Something invisible had formed between them, a fragile thread of possibility, a shared acknowledgement of pain that needed no translation. Tu dolor no define quien eres, Miguel said softly. Your pain does not define who you are. As if understanding, Thunder lowered his head slightly, blowing softly through his nostrils. Miguel eventually stood, picking up his bucket to continue his rounds. The stallion did not retreat aggressively as he did with others. He simply remained still, watching Miguel with new awareness. Hasta mañana, hermoso, Miguel promised, tucking the book back into his pocket. Until tomorrow, beautiful one. As he closed the stable door behind him, the old horseman felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. The following night, Miguel returned to Thunder's stall at the same hour, carrying his poetry book and a small red apple tucked in his pocket. The memory of their first connection had lingered with him throughout the day, a small flame of possibility warming his thoughts as he completed his mundane tasks. When he approached the stall, he noticed something different immediately. Thunder wasn't hiding in the shadows as usual. The stallion stood closer to the front, ears perked forward as if he had been waiting, listening for familiar footsteps. Buenas noches, Miguel said softly, settling onto the same hay bale. He made no sudden movements, no attempts to approach. Thunder's ears remained trained on him, following the sound of his voice like a beacon in darkness. From further down the stable aisle, Blake Johnson's voice cut through the peaceful moment. Wasting your time with that devil horse Ramirez? The head trainer appeared, leaning against a post with arms crossed over his chest. His expensive boots and pressed shirt contrasted sharply with Miguel's worn work clothes. Just reading, senor, Miguel replied quietly, not rising to the bait. Johnson snorted. Reading to a horse? These Mexican superstitions won't tame a traumatized animal. That horse needs a firm hand, not bedtime stories. Miguel nodded respectfully but said nothing more. Experience had taught him the futility of arguing with men like Johnson, whose understanding of horses began and ended with dominance. After a few moments of uncomfortable silence, the trainer shook his head and walked away, muttering something about backward methods. When Johnson's footsteps faded, Miguel turned back to Thunder. He thinks you need to be dominated, he said in Spanish, opening his book. But you've had enough of men trying to break your spirit, haven't you? Thunder shifted his weight, blowing softly through his nostrils as if in agreement. Miguel began reading where he had left off the previous night, his voice a gentle current in the stillness of the stable. He read poems about freedom, about mountains and open skies, words that seemed to resonate in the enclosed space of the stall. This became their nightly ritual. Miguel would arrive after the other workers had retired, sitting at a respectful distance while reading poetry or sometimes simply talking about his day. He spoke exclusively in Spanish, noting how Thunder's ears would prick forward at the sound of the language that had never been associated with his trauma. After a week of these sessions, Miguel brought the red apple, sliced into pieces. He placed one slice on the ground near the stall door, not forcing Thunder to approach. The stallion eyed the offering warily, nostrils flaring at the sweet scent. "No hay prisa," Miguel assured him. "There's no hurry." He continued reading, pretending not to notice when Thunder finally stretched his neck toward the apple slice, sniffing cautiously before taking it with delicate precision. Miguel kept his celebration internal, not wanting to startle the horse with sudden excitement. This small gesture of trust was more valuable than any trick or command could ever be. Word began to spread among the Latino workers of the farm. Carlos was the first to witness one of their sessions, stopping in amazement when he saw Thunder standing calmly as Miguel read. "Es como magia," Carlos whispered to Esperanza Diaz, a domestic worker from the neighboring property the next day. "The devil horse listens to him like he's telling the most interesting story in the world." Esperanza, a grandmother whose wisdom was respected throughout the small community of immigrant workers, came to see for herself one evening. She stood at a safe distance, watching in wonder as Miguel placed apple slices progressively closer to himself each night, Thunder advancing a little further each time to accept the offerings. "He speaks to the animal like they're old friends catching up," she later told the others, crossing herself. "Él tiene un don." He has a gift. Soon, other Latino workers began appearing discreetly during Miguel's evening sessions, hanging back in the shadows to witness the gradual transformation. None interfered. They simply observed with reverent silence, some nodding in understanding when Miguel explained his approach. "My father taught me that horses carry the memory of everything that's happened to them," he told a small group one evening after Thunder had retreated to sleep. "Thunder associates English with pain because that's the language that was shouted at him when he was beaten or spurred. Spanish is neutral ground." Days stretched into weeks. Miguel's patient approach began showing visible results. Thunder no longer pinned his ears back when Miguel approached his stall. The apple slices moved gradually from the ground to Miguel's open palm, each acceptance a milestone in their developing trust. "The trick is not thinking of it as training," Miguel explained to Carlos one afternoon while mucking stalls. "Training is about making an animal do what you want. This is about giving him the space to choose." It was during the third week of their evening sessions that Evelyn Whitman appeared unexpectedly in the stable. Miguel was so focused on Thunder, who had just taken an apple slice from his palm for the first time, that he didn't notice her until she spoke. "Is it true what they say?" Her voice was soft but startled both man and horse. Thunder retreated several steps, though without the panic he showed around most strangers. "That you can touch him?" Miguel stood slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans. Evelyn Whitman was a slender woman in her early 50s, with careful blonde hair and the kind of polished appearance that spoke of wealth without happiness. She kept a cautious distance from Thunder's stall. "Not yet, Señora," Miguel answered honestly. "But soon, perhaps, if he chooses." Evelyn's eyes moved from Miguel to the stallion, who had calmed again and was watching them with alert curiosity. Everyone said he was dangerous, unmanageable. Miguel shook his head slightly. "Thunder is not violent, Señora. He is afraid. Fear does terrible things to any creature." Something in his words seemed to resonate with her. She stepped closer, though still maintaining a safe distance from the stall. "How did you get him to take food from you?" "Blake Johnson said he refuses to eat if anyone is watching." "Paciencia," Miguel replied simply. "And I never use things that remind him of his trauma. No whips, no spurs, no harsh words." Evelyn studied him with new interest. Would it disturb your process if I watched sometime?" The question surprised him. The wife of Charles Whitman had never shown interest in the actual care of the horses before, appearing only for photo opportunities or social events at the stable. "You are welcome, Señora. Thunder is learning that not all humans bring pain." She nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips before she composed herself again. "Thank you, Miguel. Please don't mention my visit to Mr. Whitman. He's preoccupied with other matters." After she left, Miguel returned to Thunder, who had been watching the exchange with obvious interest. "She is like you, I think," he said softly in Spanish. "Also afraid, also trapped." The following evening, Evelyn returned as promised, this time carrying a canvas bag. She sat quietly on a wooden chair she'd brought from the tack room, observing as Miguel read and occasionally offered apple slices to Thunder. When the stallion had retreated to the back of his stall to rest, she approached Miguel with the bag. "I found these in the library," she said, pulling out several books on equine behavior. "I used to study veterinary medicine before I married Charles. He thought it wasn't appropriate for his wife to work with animals." Miguel accepted the books with genuine appreciation. "Gracias, señora. My English reading is slow, but this will help." "Why does he respond to Spanish but not English?" she asked, watching Thunder's ears flick toward them when Miguel spoke. "Because no one ever hurt him using my words," Miguel answered simply. For him, English is the language of pain. A silence fell between them, heavy with understanding. Finally, Evelyn spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea how they were training him. The methods they used." Miguel nodded, choosing his words carefully. "Many believe that breaking a spirit is the same as earning trust. It is not the same." Their conversations became another ritual in the evenings that followed. Evelyn would arrive after dinner, explaining to her husband that she needed fresh air for her migraines. She brought books, occasionally homemade food for Miguel, and most importantly, her growing knowledge of veterinary medicine that complemented his intuitive understanding. "I've been researching trauma responses in horses," she told him one evening, showing him an article she'd printed. "Everything you're doing aligns with the most current research. The slow approach, the consistent routine, the positive associations." Miguel smiled. "My father would say science is finally catching up to what horsemen have known for centuries." The breakthrough came nearly a month after their first reading session. Miguel was speaking softly to Thunder as usual when the stallion approached the stall door and, for the first time, extended his muzzle through the bars. With infinite patience, Miguel raised his hand very slowly until his fingertips made contact with Thunder's nose. The touch lasted only seconds before Thunder withdrew, but the significance was enormous. "You did it," Evelyn whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "He let you touch him." Word spread quickly through the community of workers. Esperanza, who had been watching from the shadows, crossed herself. "Es como magia," she murmured, echoing Carlos's earlier sentiment. "He speaks to the animal as if conversing with a friend." The following day, Evelyn arrived at the stable with something hidden under a cloth. When she revealed it, Miguel recognized an old but beautifully maintained English saddle, much lighter than the heavy tack used by Whitman's trainers. "It was mine from college," she explained. "I thought, when he's ready, this might be less intimidating than the equipment Blake uses." Their progress continued steadily. Miguel gradually introduced Thunder to human touch, always respecting the stallion's boundaries, always allowing him to retreat when uncomfortable. He began entering the stall, initially just standing quietly in one corner, then slowly moving closer day by day. Thunder's curiosity eventually overcame his fear, and he would approach Miguel to sniff his clothes or gently investigate the book in his hands. One quiet morning before the other workers arrived, Miguel demonstrated to Evelyn how Thunder now accepted his presence inside the stall, responding to soft commands in Spanish. "Why doesn't he respond the same way to English commands?" she asked, watching in amazement as Thunder followed Miguel's gentle gestures. "Because no one ever hurt him using my words," Miguel repeated his earlier explanation. To him, English is the language that came before pain. The news eventually reached Evelyn's neighbor, the wife of a prominent horse breeder, who mentioned it during a charity committee meeting. From there it spread to Eleanor Henderson, wife of a potential investor, who had expressed interest in Thunder before his breakdown. On a misty dawn 6 weeks after their first reading session, Miguel took the most significant step yet. With Evelyn watching anxiously from outside, he gently placed her old saddle on Thunder's back. The stallion tensed momentarily, but then relaxed as Miguel continued speaking softly in Spanish. With infinite care, Miguel guided his foot into the stirrup and slowly, ever so slowly, mounted. Thunder stood perfectly still, ears moving back to listen to Miguel's continued stream of gentle Spanish. Then, Responding to the lightest pressure of Miguel's legs, he took a few careful steps forward within the confines of his stall. "He understands everything," Miguel explained to Evelyn afterward, his usually stoic face alight with quiet joy. "He doesn't need harsh bits or spurs. He chooses to obey because he trusts." The story of the Mexican horse whisperer spread rapidly among the staff, eventually reaching Charles Whitman's ears during his breakfast meeting with the farm manager. "You're telling me some illiterate Mexican stable hand managed to ride Thunder when specialists with decades of experience failed?" he demanded, his voice rising in disbelief. That same afternoon, Charles appeared at Miguel's modest trailer, his expensive SUV looking absurdly out of place beside the weathered structure. Miguel stood respectfully as his employer approached, hat in hand. "If you can get Thunder competition ready again, I'll double your salary," Whitman said without preamble. "But if you fail, you're out." Miguel nodded silently, knowing there was much more at stake than money or employment. There was a soul, actually, two souls, that needed saving. The early morning light filtered through the stable windows as Miguel processed Charles Whitman's ultimatum: double his salary or lose his job. Such simple terms for something so complex. Money had never been Miguel's motivation for working with Thunder. The connection forming between them transcended financial considerations, touching something deeper that he suspected Charles Whitman could never understand. The following days brought a transformation to Whitman Acres. Word of Charles's promotion of Miguel spread quickly, creating ripples throughout the established hierarchy. Blake Johnson made his displeasure known through thinly veiled comments and obstructive behaviors, while the Latino workers watched with cautious optimism as one of their own gained unprecedented recognition. Evelyn began visiting the stables more frequently, her interest no longer requiring secrecy now that her husband had officially endorsed Miguel's work with Thunder. She arrived one morning carrying a stack of leather-bound journals. "My old veterinary notebooks," she explained, placing them carefully on a hay bale. "I thought they might help us understand Thunder's physical responses better." Miguel nodded gratefully. "Two minds are better than one, Senora." Together, they established a systematic approach to Thunder's rehabilitation. Evelyn's scientific knowledge complemented Miguel's intuitive understanding, creating a methodology that respected the stallion's boundaries while gradually expanding his comfort zone. "Look at how he shifts his weight when approached from the right side," Evelyn noted, watching Thunder's subtle movements. "That suggests the trauma might be associated with something that happened on that side." Miguel observed carefully. His previous trainer, the one who died, was he right-handed? "Yes," Evelyn confirmed after consulting the farm records, and the reports say he was known for using a particularly heavy crop. This insight allowed them to adjust their approach, with Miguel always approaching from Thunder's left side until trust was established enough to work through the right side anxiety. Charles remained largely absent during these sessions, content to receive progress reports from the farm manager. When he did appear, it was always with photographers in tow, positioning himself prominently in the frame while Miguel worked quietly with Thunder in the background. "Make sure you get the Whitman Acres logo in the shot," Charles would instruct the photographers, "and try to catch me in profile with the horse." These interruptions invariably set Thunder's progress back, the flashing cameras and Charles's booming voice triggering the stallion's defensive responses. After such sessions, Miguel would spend hours rebuilding the trust that had been fractured, softly reading poetry in the quiet evening hours until Thunder's anxiety subsided. One particularly intrusive photo session left Thunder so agitated that he refused to approach Miguel the following day, standing trembling in the corner of his stall with ears pinned back. "We lost a week of progress yesterday," Evelyn said sadly, watching the stallion's distress. Miguel nodded, his weathered face revealing no frustration, only patient determination. "Then we will take another week. Thunder's timeline is not Mr. Whitman's timeline." Word of Miguel's gentle methods spread beyond the immediate farm staff. Esperanza Diaz, who worked as a housekeeper for the Henderson family in the neighboring property, became an unofficial ambassador for Miguel's approach. "You should see how he talks to this horse," she told Mrs. Henderson while dusting the family's trophy room. Not shouting commands like the other trainers, but speaking like you would to a friend who has suffered. Eleanor Henderson, president of the local Animal Protection Society and wife of a potential investor in Whitman's enterprises, found herself intrigued by these reports. Without announcing her intentions to Charles, she began making discreet inquiries about the rehabilitation of the famous stallion that had caught her husband's interest. Meanwhile, Miguel and Evelyn continued their systematic work with Thunder. Each day brought small victories, Thunder accepting a bridle without resistance, responding to leg pressure signals, walking calmly beside Miguel in the small paddock. They documented everything meticulously in a journal that combined Evelyn's scientific observations with Miguel's intuitive notes. "He's ready for the larger training ring," Miguel suggested one morning after a particularly successful session. Evelyn agreed, and they scheduled the transition for early the next day when the property would be quietest. What they hadn't anticipated was Charles arriving with potential investors just as they were leading Thunder from his stall. "Perfect timing," Charles exclaimed, striding toward them with 4 expensively dressed men in tow. "Gentlemen, you're about to witness the revolutionary training method developed right here at Whitman Acres." Miguel exchanged a concerned glance with Evelyn. Thunder was already tensing at the sudden appearance of strangers, his ears flicking nervously. "Charles," Evelyn began cautiously, "we weren't prepared for an audience today. Thunder is still adjusting to—" "Nonsense," Charles interrupted. "These gentlemen have traveled from Kentucky to see our progress. Miguel, proceed with the demonstration." Trapped between his employer's demands and his concern for Thunder's well-being, Miguel opted for the gentlest possible approach. Speaking softly in Spanish, he continued leading Thunder toward the training ring, maintaining physical contact to reassure the nervous animal. The group followed at a distance, with Charles narrating as if he were the architect of the entire process. "You'll notice we've abandoned conventional methods in favor of my innovative approach. I've always believed that understanding the psychology of these animals is key." Miguel fought to keep his expression neutral, focusing entirely on Thunder's needs. The stallion's muscles quivered beneath his hand, but he continued forward, responding to Miguel's gentle guidance. Once in the ring, Miguel began the routine they had practiced for weeks: simple walking patterns, gentle transitions, basic response commands, all communicated through the lightest possible contact and soft Spanish words. The investors watched with genuine interest, murmuring appreciatively as Thunder executed a perfect circle around Miguel, maintaining exact distance without a lead rope. "Remarkable," commented one of the men. "I've never seen such subtle communication between handler and horse." Charles beamed, stepping closer to the fence. "This is just the beginning, gentlemen. In a few weeks, we'll have Thunder back to competition standard." His movement toward the fence caught Thunder's attention, causing the stallion to falter momentarily in his pattern. Miguel immediately adjusted, creating space between Thunder and the perceived threat, murmuring reassurances. "Let's see how he responds to traditional equipment," suggested one of the investors, a silver-haired man with a Kentucky drawl. "That's where the real test lies." Charles nodded enthusiastically. "Excellent idea. Miguel, use the competition bridle and saddle." Miguel hesitated, knowing that Thunder had only recently accepted Evelyn's lighter, less restrictive equipment. "Senor Whitman, perhaps we could demonstrate with what he is comfortable with first, then gradually." "These men want to see a competition-ready horse, not a partially trained one," Charles insisted, his smile tightening. "The premium equipment is in the tack room. Use it." Evelyn stepped forward. "Charles, we've been making excellent progress with a gradual approach. Rushing could— Did I ask for your veterinary opinion?" Charles cut her off sharply, causing several of the investors to shift uncomfortably. "Last I checked, you abandoned that career path to become my wife." The cruelty of his dismissal hung in the air. Miguel saw something flash in Evelyn's eyes, a mixture of hurt and resolve, before she stepped back, her posture stiffening. With no choice but to comply, Miguel retrieved the heavy competition tack from the storage room. The ornate bridle with its substantial bit and the weight of the show saddle represented everything they had been avoiding in Thunder's rehabilitation. As gently as possible, Miguel approached Thunder with the equipment. The stallion immediately recognized the familiar trappings of his traumatic past, nostrils flaring and eyes widening. His entire body tensed, ready for flight. Es solo cuero y metal, Miguel soothed in Spanish. No te lastimará si no lo permitimos. It's just leather and metal. It won't hurt you if we don't allow it. Through patient coaxing and continuous gentle contact, Miguel managed to place the saddle on Thunder's back. The stallion trembled but held his ground, trusting Miguel despite his obvious fear. The bridle proved more challenging, Thunder tossing his head repeatedly at the sight of the heavy bit. "He doesn't like that bit," observed one of the investors. "My trainer would use a twisted wire to make him accept it." Miguel pretended not to hear, continuing his gentle approach until Thunder finally, reluctantly, accepted the bit into his mouth. "Now," Charles said triumphantly, "show them how he responds to a rider." With profound gentleness, Miguel mounted Thunder, keeping his weight light and his hands soft on the reins. Thunder stood perfectly still, though Miguel could feel the tension vibrating through the powerful body beneath him. "Walk on," Charles commanded from outside the ring. Miguel gave the softest possible cue in Spanish, and Thunder began moving forward with cautious steps. The investors nodded approvingly, commenting on the stallion's perfect conformation and movement. Then one of them called out, "Let's see some speed. Give him a tap." Before Miguel could respond, Charles had grabbed a crop from a nearby rack and was extending it toward him. "Show them what $2 million looks like at a proper gait, Miguel." Thunder saw the crop and froze mid-stride, his entire body going rigid. Memories of pain, fear, and the traumatic death of his former handler flooded back, triggered by the sight of the implement that had caused so much suffering. "No necesitas esto," Miguel said firmly, refusing to take the crop. "He moves because he chooses to, not because he fears punishment." Charles's face darkened. "Take the crop, Miguel. That's an order." The tension in the ring was palpable. Miguel, still mounted on the increasingly agitated Thunder, made a crucial decision. With deliberate slowness, he dismounted, removed the heavy competition bridle, and replaced it with the simple rope halter they had been using in their training. "What do you think you're doing?" Charles demanded. "Showing these gentlemen what Thunder can truly do," Miguel replied quietly, "when he is respected rather than feared." With just the halter and a single lead rope, Miguel began working Thunder through a series of movements that demonstrated not just obedience but willing partnership. The stallion's anxiety visibly melted away as they returned to their established patterns of communication. The investors watched in amazement as Thunder executed complex maneuvers with minimal visible cooing, moving in perfect harmony with Miguel's subtle body language. "I've never seen anything like it," murmured the silver-haired investor. "No spurs, no crop, not even proper reins, yet more precise control than most championship riders achieve." When the demonstration concluded, the investors applauded spontaneously. Charles, recognizing the undeniable impression Miguel had made, quickly reasserted his authority by stepping into the ring to shake hands with the men, positioning himself as the visionary behind the method. "As you can see, gentlemen, at Whitman Acres, we're redefining the relationship between man and horse," he proclaimed, placing his hand on Thunder's neck, a liberty the stallion only tolerated because of Miguel's calming presence. That evening, after the investors had departed, Evelyn found Miguel in the stable, gently removing the last traces of the competition tack from Thunder's coat. "What you did today was remarkable," she said softly. "You defied Charles without directly disobeying him." Miguel shrugged slightly. "I did what was best for Thunder." Evelyn moved closer, offering a cooling salve for where the heavy saddle had rubbed against Thunder's back. "You spend more time in this stable than in your own home." "This is more home to me than that trailer," Miguel admitted, applying the salve with gentle fingers. They worked in comfortable silence for several minutes, the bond between them growing in the shared care of the animal they both had come to love. When Thunder was settled for the night, Evelyn hesitated before leaving. "My husband sees Thunder as an investment to be recovered," she said quietly. "But you've shown me something different, something I've been missing since I gave up my studies." Miguel nodded in understanding. "Some people see horses as machines to be operated. Others see them as mirrors of our own souls." "Which do you see?" she asked. Both, he replied simply. Thunder shows us who we truly are, not who we pretend to be. As they walked together toward the stable doors, the evening light cast long shadows across the grounds of Whitman Acres. Behind them, Thunder rested peacefully for the first time in months, his breathing deep and regular in the quiet sanctuary Miguel had created. "You spend more time in that stable than in our house," accused Charles during dinner that night, breaking a crystal glass with the force of his anger. The sound of glass shattering punctuated Charles's accusation, fragments of crystal catching the dining room light like scattered diamonds across the pristine tablecloth. Evelyn didn't flinch. Years of marriage to Charles had taught her to anticipate these outbursts of controlled violence, objects broken as substitutes for the words he couldn't say or the actions society wouldn't permit. "I'm simply taking an interest in our investments," she replied evenly, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "Wasn't it you who said Thunder represented $2 million of our money?" Charles studied his wife with narrowed eyes. In their 23 years of marriage, Evelyn had rarely challenged him, content to exist in the gilded cage he had constructed. This newfound interest in the stables, in that Mexican stable hand, disturbed him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. "My investments," he corrected. "And speaking of investments, the news about Thunder has spread faster than I anticipated." The following morning, Charles summoned Miguel to the main house, an unprecedented request that sent whispers through the staff. Miguel arrived promptly, hat in hand, standing uncomfortably in the opulent foyer, where the marble floor alone probably cost more than he would earn in a lifetime. "Good news, Miguel," Charles announced, descending the grand staircase with theatrical timing. "Your work with Thunder has attracted attention. I've had calls from the Tennessean and even Southern Horse Journal requesting interviews." Miguel shifted uneasily. "I do not seek attention, senor. I only wish to help Thunder." Charles waved this concern away as if swatting a fly. "That's precisely the humble angle we'll promote. Local papers are sending photographers this afternoon. We'll showcase Whitman Acres' revolutionary rehabilitation program." By midday, the tranquil routine Miguel had carefully established was shattered. Photographers with flashing cameras crowded the training area, reporters shouted questions, and Charles orchestrated it all like a symphony conductor, positioning himself prominently in every shot. "Stand over there, Miguel," Charles directed, pointing to a spot that would place him partially obscured behind both Thunder and Charles himself. "And make sure Thunder looks, what's the word, rehabilitated." Thunder stood rigid, nostrils flared, eyes darting nervously at the unfamiliar faces and equipment. The camera flashes particularly disturbed him, each burst of light causing a visible flinch that anyone familiar with equine behavior would recognize as mounting distress. "Perhaps we could continue without the flashes," Miguel suggested quietly to one photographer. No, Charles interjected before the man could respond. "We need quality images. Thunder will adjust." Miguel exchanged a concerned glance with Evelyn, who had positioned herself at the edge of the gathering. She understood immediately, stepping forward with practiced social grace. "Perhaps some refreshments for our media guests," she suggested, directing attention toward the house. "We've prepared a lovely spread, and it would give Miguel time to prepare Thunder for some more controlled shots." The distraction worked temporarily, allowing Miguel precious minutes to soothe Thunder with quiet Spanish reassurances. "Tranquilo, mi amigo. Son solo personas curiosas. No te harán daño. Calm, my friend. They're just curious people. They won't hurt you." Over the following weeks, Miguel found himself uncomfortably thrust into a narrative not of his creation. The Louisville Journal ran a feature titled "Miracle at Whitman Acres. Revolutionary Horse Whispering Technique Saves $1 Million Investment." Accompanying photos showed Charles Whitman prominently, with Miguel a blurred figure in the background. "They make it sound like I invented your methods," Charles laughed during one inspection visit, tossing the newspaper onto a hay bale. "But that's marketing for you. The Whitman Acres brand is what will sell this story." Miguel said nothing, focusing instead on Thunder's needs. The constant interruptions and photo sessions had begun taking their toll. The stallion had become hypervigilant again, startling at sudden movements, losing the peaceful demeanor they had worked so hard to establish. Evelyn noticed immediately. "He's regressing," she observed one evening, watching Thunder pace in his stall. All these people, the cameras, Charles's booming voice, they're triggering his trauma responses. Miguel nodded, his weathered face lined with concern. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. This is normal in healing, but Charles is pushing too hard, too fast, Evelyn finished for him. The pressure intensified when Charles promoted the story to his network of wealthy horse enthusiasts. Potential buyers and investors began making appointments to witness the Whitman method firsthand, each visit requiring Thunder to perform on command. "We're losing him," Miguel confided to Evelyn after a particularly difficult demonstration for a Texas oil magnate. "He goes through the motions because he trusts me, but his spirit is withdrawing again." The breaking point came when Charles invited James Henderson, a potential buyer known for his traditional views on horse training. Henderson arrived wearing polished boots and carrying a custom-made crop, the very implement that triggered Thunder's worst memories. "Let's see how he responds to a firm hand," Henderson suggested, slapping the crop against his palm as Miguel led Thunder into the training ring. Thunder froze, his entire body tensing at the sound. Years of trauma crystallized in that moment, the whistle of air, the crack of leather, the memory of pain. Miguel felt the change instantly, the trust they'd built wavering under the assault of old fears. "Senor Henderson," Miguel began carefully, "Thunder has negative associations with whips. Perhaps we could demonstrate without—" "Nonsense," interrupted Charles, eager to please the wealthy potential buyer. "A properly trained horse responds to all standard equipment. Henderson wants to see a competition-ready animal, not a half-trained pet." Miguel positioned himself protectively between Thunder and the visitors. "I can show you everything he has learned, but without the crop." Henderson's expression hardened. "I need to test his reactions under pressure. Every horse I own must accept standard discipline." Before Miguel could object further, Henderson stepped forward, raising the crop to tap it against the fence. The sharp sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. Thunder's reaction was immediate and violent. With a terrified whinny, he reared up, front hooves pawing the air. Miguel maintained his grip on the lead rope, speaking rapid, soothing Spanish, but the stallion's fear had overwhelmed rational response. When his hooves returned to earth, he bolted sideways, nearly trampling Henderson, who stumbled backward into Charles. "Control that animal," Henderson shouted, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. For several chaotic moments, Thunder circled the ring in panic, dragging Miguel, who refused to release the rope and risk the stallion injuring himself on the fencing. Finally, through constant gentle words and maintaining a centered calm in the midst of chaos, Miguel managed to slow Thunder's flight, gradually bringing him to a trembling standstill in the center of the ring. Henderson straightened his jacket, dignity bruised more than his body. "That animal is still dangerous, Whitman. All your revolutionary methods have done is mask the problem." After the visitors departed, Charles stormed into the stable where Miguel was gently cooling down the still agitated Thunder. "6 weeks of work thrown away," he shouted, unconcerned about the effect his volume had on the traumatized animal. Henderson was prepared to offer $800,000. Thunder shifted nervously at the loud voice, and Miguel placed himself between the stallion and Charles, a human shield against further stress. "Senor, please," he said quietly. "Thunder needs calm now." Charles stepped closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. "What I need, Miguel, is results. No more poetry reading, no more gentle whispers. We're bringing back methods that work." Evelyn appeared at the stable entrance, having witnessed the demonstration's disastrous conclusion from a distance. "Charles, you can't blame Miguel for Henderson's poor judgment. Anyone with basic horse knowledge would know not to." "I don't recall asking for your input," Charles cut her off sharply. "This is business, not one of your charity projects." That evening, a tense meeting took place in Charles's study. Blake Johnson had been summoned back to the farm, his confident smirk revealing he already knew the purpose of his return. "Blake will resume primary training responsibilities tomorrow," Charles announced to Miguel. "You'll assist and continue handling basic care, but we're implementing a more structured approach." "Structured is one word for it," Johnson added with a thin smile. "I told you from the beginning, these animals understand one language: dominance." Miguel stood silently, eyes downcast, the perfect picture of the submissive worker. Only Evelyn caught the slight stiffening of his shoulders, the barely perceptible straightening of his spine. Not submission, but contained dignity. "Thunder has made real progress," Miguel finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "Returning to aggressive methods will destroy his trust completely." Charles dismissed this with a wave. "The Willowbrook Charity Cup is in 6 weeks. I've already announced Thunder's comeback. We need guaranteed results, not trust-building exercises." After Miguel was dismissed, Evelyn confronted her husband. "You're making a terrible mistake. Miguel's methods are working. They just require time." "Time is money," Charles replied coldly. "And speaking of money, I've noticed you spend an awful lot of time in those stables lately. One might almost think you had more interest in our stable hand than in our investment." The implication hung in the air between them, ugly and deliberate. Evelyn met her husband's gaze without flinching. "What I have interest in, Charles, is not seeing an animal tortured for your ego." The following morning, Miguel arrived to find Blake Johnson already in Thunder's stall, a training whip in one hand and chain shank in the other. The stallion was pressed against the back wall, eyes rolling in terror, sweat darkening his black coat. "Just establishing the hierarchy," Johnson explained with casual cruelty. "By the end of the week, he'll remember who's boss." Miguel was relegated to cleaning distant stalls, the sounds of Thunder's distressed whinnies punctuating his work like stabs to the heart. During his lunch break, he found Esperanza waiting behind the feed room. "They cannot do this," she whispered fiercely. "Everyone in the community is talking about how you helped that horse when the gringos couldn't." Word spread quickly through the network of Latino workers. Carlos created a distraction that afternoon, allowing Miguel precious minutes with Thunder. The once proud stallion stood trembling in his stall, fresh welts visible on his haunches. "Lo siento, mi amigo," Miguel whispered, fighting back tears. "I'm so sorry." That night, as Miguel returned to his trailer, he found Evelyn waiting in the shadows, her face tense with purpose. Behind her stood Esperanza and several other Latino workers from neighboring farms. "They won't hurt Thunder again," Evelyn said with quiet determination. "We have a plan, but we need your courage. And it might cost you your job." Miguel stared at the small gathering outside his trailer, the weight of Evelyn's words settling like stone in his chest. Her face, usually composed behind a careful mask of socialite polish, now burned with a determination he had never seen before. Behind her, Esperanza and 5 other Latino workers from neighboring farms stood in solidarity, their presence a silent testament to how deeply Thunder's situation had touched the community. "What kind of plan?" Miguel asked cautiously, ushering them inside his modest trailer where their meeting would attract less attention. Inside, the cramped space forced them close together. Evelyn, dressed in casual clothes rather than her usual expensive attire, seemed unbothered by the humble surroundings as she opened a leather portfolio. "Eleanor Henderson," she began, her voice low but steady, "the president of the Animal Protection Society, and conveniently, the wife of the investor who witnessed Thunder's panic attack." Miguel nodded, recognizing the name of the silver-haired woman who occasionally appeared in local newspaper photographs at charity events. Unlike her husband, Eleanor is deeply committed to animal welfare, Evelyn continued. "I've arranged for her to make an unannounced inspection of Whitman Acres, ostensibly as part of a routine review of all breeding facilities in the county." Esperanza, who worked for the Hendersons, nodded vigorously. "La Señora Henderson has been fighting against cruel training methods for years. She even fired her husband's favorite trainer when she discovered he was using electric prods." "When will she come?" Miguel asked. 3 days from now," Evelyn replied. "But until then, We need to ensure Thunder survives Blake's training without his spirit being completely broken. The group outlined their strategy. Esperanza would keep them informed of Eleanor Henderson's exact arrival time. The Latino workers would create a rotation of distractions to provide Miguel with brief windows to visit Thunder, while Evelyn would document Johnson's methods with a hidden camera disguised as a brooch. "It's dangerous," Miguel warned, looking at each face in turn. "If Mr. Whitman discovers this, some things are worth risking everything for," Evelyn said quietly, her eyes meeting his with unexpected intensity. Dawn broke harsh and bright the next morning. Miguel arrived at the stables earlier than usual, hoping for a moment with Thunder before Johnson began his day. The sight that greeted him twisted his gut into knots. A printed schedule had been affixed to the wall outside Thunder's stall. Preparation for Willowbrook Cup, training regimen. The methodical cruelty of the schedule was chilling. 0600, 0700, feed restriction to increase responsiveness. 0800, 1000, desensitization, crop, spurs, chains. 1100, 1300, mounting and control exercises. Blake Johnson arrived promptly at 8, carrying a toolbox of training implements that made Miguel's blood run cold. Expensive new bridles with severe bits, spurs with rowels sharp enough to draw blood, and a collection of crops and whips designed to inflict maximum discomfort with minimal visible marking. "Morning, Miguel," Johnson said with false cheerfulness. "No more of those makeshift ropes and halters. Mr. Whitman wants only the best equipment used from now on." As Johnson approached Thunder's stall, the stallion's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. He retreated to the farthest corner, eyes wide with recognition and terror. His magnificent body, once a perfect sculpture of power and grace, seemed to collapse inward, shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller, less visible to the predator that had returned. "See that? He remembers who's in charge," Johnson remarked with satisfaction, interpreting Thunder's fear as respect. Miguel forced himself to turn away, focusing on his assigned tasks while straining to hear what happened in Thunder's stall. The sounds told their own story: the metallic clink of the bit, Thunder's distressed snorts, Johnson's impatient commands, and occasionally the unmistakable whistle of a crop cutting through air. When lunch break finally came, Carlos created the first of their planned distractions, accidentally knocking over a feed cart near the main office, drawing Johnson and the other stable hands to help with the cleanup. Miguel slipped quickly to Thunder's stall. What he found left him momentarily breathless with anger. Thunder stood trembling, sweat darkening his coat despite the cool spring air. Fresh welts marked his flanks where the crop had landed, and blood tinged the corners of his mouth from fighting against the harsh bit. "Mi pobre amigo," Miguel whispered, approaching slowly. Thunder flinched at first, before recognizing Miguel's voice and scent. The stallion's eyes, which had begun to show trust and even joy in recent weeks, now held only confusion and betrayal. Miguel had only minutes. Working quickly but gently, he used a soft cloth soaked in cool water to soothe the inflamed areas. From his pocket, he produced a small jar of salve that Esperanza had brought from her grandmother's recipes. "This will help with the pain," he murmured in Spanish, carefully applying the herbal mixture to the worst welts. Thunder gradually relaxed under his ministrations, leaning slightly into Miguel's touch like a child seeking comfort after punishment. All too soon, Carlos's warning whistle signaled Johnson's return. Miguel reluctantly withdrew, carrying the image of Thunder's suffering with him like a physical wound. That evening after hours, Evelyn met Miguel behind the equipment shed, her face tight with controlled fury. "I got everything," she whispered, showing him the tiny camera concealed in her decorative brooch. "The bit Johnson is using is banned in most European competitions, and the way he's restricting Thunder's water to increase compliance, it's textbook abuse." Miguel nodded grimly. Thunder is strong, but his spirit is being damaged again. Each day with Johnson destroys weeks of our progress. Over the next 2 days, their underground resistance operation continued. The Latino community expanded their involvement, with workers from 5 neighboring farms participating in the rotation of distractions. One would report a loose horse, Another would create confusion about feed deliveries, while others engaged Johnson in seemingly innocent conversations about his superior methods, appealing to his vanity to keep him talking and away from Thunder. These brief reprieves allowed Miguel precious minutes with Thunder, moments spent rebuilding fragments of trust that Johnson methodically destroyed. The pattern became painfully clear. Thunder would begin each morning fighting against Johnson's cruelty, then gradually surrender into a state of defeated compliance that Miguel recognized as the beginning stages of a broken spirit. "He's doing exactly what Charles wants," Evelyn observed bitterly after reviewing her hidden camera footage, making Thunder respond out of fear rather than trust. "It looks like obedience to the untrained eye, but it's really just self-preservation." On the afternoon before Eleanor Henderson's planned visit, Miguel found Thunder refusing food entirely, a dangerous sign in horses. The stallion stood with his head hanging low, his once bright eyes dulled with resignation. When Miguel entered the stall, Thunder barely acknowledged his presence. "No, mi amigo, no te rindas ahora," Miguel pleaded softly, urging the horse not to give up. He spent his entire break sitting on the stall floor, reading quietly from his weathered book of Neruda's poetry, re-establishing the routine that had first connected them. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Thunder's ears began to swivel toward the sound of Miguel's voice. By the time Miguel had to leave, the stallion had taken a few mouthfuls of the fresh hay Miguel had brought. "He's still in there," Miguel reported to Evelyn that evening as they met with their growing circle of allies in the small trailer. "Damaged, confused, but fighting." Evelyn nodded, then revealed a new development. Eleanor has agreed to bring 2 official inspectors from the State Agricultural Department. This won't just be a friendly visit. It will be a formal inspection with potential legal consequences. The news sent a ripple of nervous excitement through the group. Esperanza crossed herself, murmuring a prayer of thanks. For the first time in days, hope flickered in Miguel's chest, a dangerous, fragile hope that justice might prevail. The morning of the inspection dawned with a tension that seemed to electrify the air itself. Johnson arrived earlier than usual, a sense of urgency in his movements suggesting Charles had warned him about possible visitors. "Make sure everything looks perfect," he barked at the stable hands, "and keep the Mexican busy with the back stalls." Miguel complied outwardly, moving to the furthest section of the stable complex while keeping an eye on Thunder's stall. Johnson was working Thunder aggressively, clearly trying to exhaust the stallion before any visitors arrived. The cruelty of the strategy was calculating. A tired horse would appear calm to untrained observers, masking the methods used to create that fatigue. Shortly before noon, Esperanza hurried past Miguel with a laundry basket, whispering as she passed, "They're here. 10 minutes." Miguel continued his work, pulse quickening as he heard the distinctive sound of car doors closing and voices approaching. Eleanor Henderson's crisp, authoritative tone carried clearly, not the social voice of a wealthy donor, but the professional cadence of someone with purpose and authority. "Mr. Whitman, thank you for accommodating this unexpected visit. These are Inspectors Davis and Rodriguez from the State Department of Agriculture, Animal Welfare Division." Miguel couldn't see the interaction, but Charles's response was audibly strained beneath its veneer of hospitality. "Of course, always happy to demonstrate the exceptional standards at Whitman Acres. Had I known about your visit, I would have prepared a proper tour." "That's precisely why we prefer unannounced inspections," came Eleanor's pointed reply. The inspection party moved methodically through the stables, checking water quality, feed storage, and general conditions. Miguel continued working, maintaining his distance until they approached Thunder's section. Johnson stood outside the stall, crop conspicuously absent, presenting the picture of a professional trainer. "This is our rehabilitation project," Charles was explaining as Miguel finally got close enough to observe. "Thunder experienced trauma with his previous handler, but we've made remarkable progress using progressive methods." Eleanor Henderson, a dignified woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a practical bun, studied Thunder with experienced eyes. "May we see the training equipment you're using?" Johnson hesitated before displaying a collection of gear that Miguel immediately recognized as not the implements he had been using. The severe bits, spurs, and chains were nowhere to be seen, replaced by more moderate equipment kept specifically for inspections. "And your training logs?" asked one of the inspectors, a stern-looking man with a clipboard. While Johnson fumbled for paperwork that didn't exist, Eleanor moved closer to Thunder's stall, her practiced eye taking in details others might miss: the fresh welts partially hidden by strategic grooming, the tension in the stallion's body, the way he pressed himself against the back wall when Johnson moved. "Mr. Whitman," she said carefully, "I'd like to examine this horse more closely." Charles stepped forward smoothly. "Of course, though I should mention he can be unpredictable with strangers. Perhaps Blake should handle him while you observe." Eleanor fixed Charles with a steady gaze. "I've been handling traumatized horses for 30 years, Mr. Whitman. I believe I can manage a brief examination." Miguel watched, heart in his throat, as Eleanor entered the stall with slow, respectful movements. Thunder regarded her warily but didn't retreat further. With gentle efficiency, she ran her hands over his body, pausing at the areas where welts and pressure sores told their own story. "This animal shows clear signs of aggressive training methods," she stated, her voice carrying to where Charles and the inspectors stood. "These marks are consistent with excessive use of spurs and crops." Charles's face flushed. "Eleanor, surely you understand that valuable horses require firm handling." Eleanor cut him off with a raised hand. "Mr. Whitman, I have the authority to remove this animal immediately under suspicion of maltreatment." Her declaration was interrupted by a sudden movement from Johnson, who had edged closer to the stall door, unconsciously gripping a crop he had hidden in his boot. Thunder saw the movement, saw the crop, and in an instant, every terrible memory crashed through the stallion's mind. With a terrified scream that sounded almost human, he lunged forward, striking out with his front hooves in desperate self-defense. Johnson fell backward, the crop flying from his hand as he narrowly avoided being crushed against the stall door. Eleanor leapt nimbly aside, her experience saving her from injury, but the damage was done. In those few violent seconds, Thunder had confirmed in everyone's eyes his reputation as a dangerous, unstable animal. "You see?" Charles said quickly, helping Johnson to his feet. "This is what we've been working to correct. The animal is fundamentally unsafe." Eleanor Henderson, with expression severe, confronted Charles. "I have authority to remove this animal right now under suspicion of abuse." But before she could conclude, Thunder, provoked by Johnson still clutching a hidden crop, attacked violently, almost killing the trainer and reinforcing in everyone's eyes his reputation as an irredeemable animal. Eleanor Henderson stood frozen in place, her experienced eyes taking in the chaos that had erupted so suddenly. Thunder trembled against the back wall of his stall, nostrils flared and eyes wild with terror, while Blake Johnson clutched his side where the stallion's hoof had grazed him. The scene had unfolded exactly as Charles Whitman had hoped, confirming Thunder's reputation as dangerous and unmanageable. "That animal is a menace," Johnson gasped, playing up his minor injury. "I told you he can't be rehabilitated." Miguel, who had witnessed everything from the shadows of the adjacent stall, recognized the deliberate provocation. Johnson had purposely revealed the crop at precisely the moment when Thunder was most vulnerable, triggering the panic response that now appeared to validate the need for harsh methods. Eleanor's gaze shifted from Thunder to the crop that lay exposed on the ground, then to the welts visible on the stallion's flanks. Her expression hardened as she pieced together what had truly happened. "Mr. Whitman," she said, her voice level but edged with steel, "this incident changes nothing about my assessment. In fact, it confirms it." Charles stepped forward, his politician's smile firmly in place. "Eleanor, surely you can see this animal is unstable. We've been using the most progressive methods." "Progressive methods don't leave these kinds of marks," she interrupted, gesturing toward Thunder's wounds. "I've documented extensive evidence of physical abuse. As president of the Society for Animal Protection, I have the authority to remove this horse immediately." The two inspectors nodded in agreement, already making notes on their clipboards. Charles's carefully constructed facade cracked momentarily, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Eleanor," he said, lowering his voice. Let's discuss this privately. Think about the impact a public dispute would have on your husband's investments and on your organization's annual fundraising gala, which, if I recall correctly, Whitman Industries sponsors rather generously. The naked attempt at intimidation hung in the air between them. Eleanor's spine stiffened almost imperceptibly, but Miguel, watching carefully, recognized the moment of hesitation. Power and wealth had their own gravity, pulling even the most principled people into compromised orbits. After a tense negotiation in Charles's office, a temporary compromise was reached. The society would postpone any official action until after the Willowbrook Charity Cup, now just 3 days away. In exchange, Charles agreed to allow a society representative to monitor Thunder's treatment during that time. 3 days, Eleanor told Miguel quietly as she prepared to leave. That's all I could negotiate without risking everything. Make them count. When the inspectors had departed, Charles summoned Miguel to the main house. The opulent study, with its leather-bound books and hunting trophies, was designed to intimidate, to remind visitors of the gulf that separated Charles Whitman from those who served him. Sit down, Miguel, Charles instructed, pouring himself a generous measure of bourbon. He didn't offer one to Miguel. We have a situation to discuss. Miguel remained standing, his weathered hands clasped respectfully before him. I prefer to stand, senor. Charles studied him for a moment, then shrugged. Have it your way. Here's the situation. Johnson is in the hospital with 3 cracked ribs. Thunder has officially been declared dangerous by professional trainers. The Willowbrook Cup is 3 days away, and I've already announced his comeback. He took a long sip of bourbon before continuing. But Henderson and her Bleeding Heart Society are breathing down my neck, threatening investigations that could damage my political aspirations. Miguel waited silently, already sensing what was coming. So here's my offer, Charles said, setting down his glass with deliberate precision. You have one last chance. If you can get Thunder to compete on Saturday without incident, he's yours. I'll sign over ownership, write it off as a charitable donation, and be done with this entire fiasco. The unexpected offer momentarily stunned Miguel. And if I cannot? Charles's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then he'll be humanely euthanized immediately after the event. A tragic necessity after a dangerous animal injured multiple handlers despite our best rehabilitation efforts. The coldness of the ultimatum settled in Miguel's chest like ice. This wasn't an opportunity. It was a calculated gamble. If Miguel failed, Charles would be rid of a problematic investment while appearing compassionate for giving Thunder one last chance. If Miguel succeeded, Charles would salvage some positive publicity from the situation while distancing himself from the abuse allegations. I need your answer now, Miguel. 3 days to prepare Thunder for a public appearance, or we proceed with euthanasia tomorrow. I accept, Miguel said quietly, the weight of Thunder's life settling squarely on his shoulders. News of the ultimatum spread quickly through the network of Latino workers. As dusk fell that same evening, Esperanza arrived at Miguel's trailer with a small basket covered with a checkered cloth. Tamales, she explained, setting the basket on his small table. And this. From her pocket, she produced a small leather pouch containing dried herbs. My grandmother's recipe for calming frightened horses. Mix it with his water. Before Miguel could thank her, there was another knock at the door. Carlos stood outside with 2 other stable hands from neighboring farms. We heard about Thunder, Carlos said simply. Tell us how we can help. Within hours, Miguel's humble trailer became the center of an impromptu council of war. Workers from 5 different farms crowded inside, each bringing something to offer: traditional herbs and poultices for Thunder's wounds, offers to create distractions during crucial moments, promises to stand watch through the night to ensure no one interfered with Thunder's recovery. As the meeting concluded, Evelyn arrived, slipping in through the back door to avoid being seen from the main house. She carried a flash drive containing the evidence she had gathered. I've sent copies to Eleanor, she explained, but we need to focus on the immediate challenge. 3 days to undo weeks of abuse and prepare Thunder for a public event he's nowhere near ready to handle. Miguel nodded, his face grave. We will need to work in shifts. Thunder needs constant positive presence to counteract the trauma Johnson inflicted. They developed a plan that was as much spiritual healing as practical training. The community would create a protective circle around Thunder, ensuring that every moment of the next 3 days reinforced trust rather than fear. That night, after everyone else had gone, Miguel returned to the stable alone. Thunder stood trembling in the corner of his stall, still agitated from the day's events. The magnificent animal that had once commanded respect and admiration now seemed diminished, his powerful frame hunched as if to make himself a smaller target. Miguel entered the stall slowly, carrying no equipment, no tools, nothing that could be perceived as a threat. He simply sat on the floor, opened his book of poetry, and began to read in the soft, melodic Spanish that had first created their connection. For almost an hour, Thunder remained pressed against the wall, eyes fixed on Miguel with wary suspicion. The trust they had built over weeks had been severely damaged by Johnson's return. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, the tension in the stallion's body began to ease. His breathing slowed, his ears stopped flicking nervously, and eventually, he lowered his head slightly, not relaxed, but no longer poised for immediate flight. It was a small victory, but Miguel recognized its significance. "Poco a poco, mi amigo," he whispered. "Little by little, my friend." The next morning, Evelyn arrived at the stable before dawn, using her position as the owner's wife to dismiss the night guard. She found Miguel asleep in the straw beside Thunder's stall, the poetry book still open on his chest. The stallion stood watching over him, alert but calm. "You stayed all night," she said softly as Miguel woke. "He needed to know he wasn't abandoned again," Miguel replied simply, rising stiffly from the hard ground. Together they began the delicate work of rebuilding Thunder's confidence. Evelyn brought her old veterinary kit, treating the physical wounds while Miguel addressed the psychological ones. They worked in perfect harmony, their movements gentle and predictable, their voices soft and reassuring. By midday, other members of their alliance began arriving. Esperanza brought her grandson, a boy of 12 who played violin in the church choir. The boy sat outside Thunder's stall, playing gentle melodies that seemed to resonate with the traumatized animal. "Music speaks directly to the soul," Esperanza explained. "It bypasses fear and goes straight to the heart." Carlos and 2 other men constructed a temporary screen that would shield Thunder's stall from direct view, creating a sanctuary within the busy stable. Inside this protected space, Miguel could work without curious onlookers triggering Thunder's anxiety. Throughout the day, a steady rotation of helpers maintained a constant positive presence. Some brought special treats, carrots, apples, sugar cubes, that Miguel would offer with soft words of encouragement. Others simply sat quietly, accustoming Thunder to the presence of humans who demanded nothing from him. "We are re-teaching him that people can exist in his space without causing pain," Miguel explained to a young stable hand, who asked why they were just sitting there. "Sometimes the most powerful training is simply being present without demands." By nightfall, Thunder had begun accepting gentle touches from Miguel again, though he still startled at unexpected movements. The progress was fragile but real. The second day brought new challenges. Charles appeared mid-morning with a photographer from Southern Horse Journal. "Just checking on our miracle in progress," he announced with forced joviality. "The readers will love this comeback story." Miguel positioned himself protectively between Thunder and the camera, his body language calm but resolute. "The flash will frighten him, senor. We are making progress, but he is not ready for photographs." Charles frowned, unused to being denied anything on his own property. But with Eleanor Henderson's threat of investigation still hanging over him, he reluctantly conceded. "Fine, but I expect results by tomorrow, Miguel. The Charity Cup isn't just any event. It's where I announce my Senate campaign." When Charles had gone, Evelyn shook her head in disgust. "Everything is always about him. Even Thunder's suffering is just a potential publicity problem." As they continued their gentle rehabilitation, members of the Latino community filtered in and out, each contributing in their own way. An elderly groundskeeper brought a special salve for Thunder's wounds. A cook from the main house smuggled out premium grain mixed with molasses to tempt Thunder's diminished appetite. That evening, as the sun began to set, Miguel led Thunder from his stall for the first time since Johnson's injury. Moving with infinite patience, he guided the stallion to a small paddock screened from view of the main house. Thunder stepped cautiously, his eyes constantly scanning for threats, but he followed Miguel willingly, a testament to the trust being rebuilt between them. Under the deepening twilight, Miguel removed even the simple halter he had been using, leaving Thunder completely free. The stallion stood uncertainly for a moment, then began to move around the paddock, testing his freedom with careful steps that gradually became more confident. Evelyn watched from the fence, tears shimmering in her eyes. "He remembers what freedom feels like," she whispered. As darkness fell completely, Miguel softly called to Thunder in Spanish. The stallion paused, then approached voluntarily, lowering his proud head to rest momentarily against Miguel's chest, a gesture of such profound trust that the small group of watchers collectively held their breath. On the third and final day before the competition, Miguel knew they faced their greatest challenge. Thunder had responded remarkably to their intensive care, but the Charity Cup would expose him to crowds, noise, and countless triggers that could reawaken his trauma. Eleanor Henderson arrived early, fulfilling her promise to monitor Thunder's treatment. "The investigation will proceed regardless of what happens tomorrow," she assured Miguel. "But I understand why you're trying this. Some horses can't survive being institutionalized in a rescue facility. They need purpose, connection." As sunset approached on the eve of the competition, Miguel made a decision that surprised even Evelyn. Leading Thunder from the stable, he mounted the stallion bareback, using only a simple rope halter, and rode slowly toward the open fields beyond the training areas. "Miguel, where are you going?" Evelyn called, concerned. "Charles will be furious if he sees Thunder outside the approved areas." Miguel turned back briefly, a rare smile softening his weathered features. "Thunder needs to remember who he truly is. Not a broken thing, but a creature born to run beneath the stars." For over an hour, Miguel and Thunder were visible only as a distant silhouette against the darkening sky, moving in perfect harmony across the rolling Tennessee landscape. When they finally returned, there was a new light in Thunder's eyes, a spark of his former spirit rekindled. Leading Thunder back to his stall for the night, Miguel whispered promises in the stallion's ear. As he secured the door, he found Charles Whitman waiting in the shadows, his expression unreadable in the dim, stable light. "Impressive, Miguel. Really impressive," Charles said, his voice carrying a dangerous undercurrent. "But tomorrow won't be moonlight and silence and your magical Spanish words. There will be demanding crowds, severe judges, and my reputation at stake. And believe me, I won't allow an immigrant and a broken horse to ruin everything I've worked for." Charles's threat lingered in the air long after he had disappeared into the darkness, his words hanging like a storm cloud over the peaceful moment Miguel had created with Thunder. The old horseman remained motionless beside the stall, his weathered hand resting lightly on the wooden door as he absorbed the full weight of tomorrow's challenge. Morning arrived with the bustling sounds of chaos, workers setting up tents, delivery trucks rumbling across the gravel drives, and the distant buzz of early arrivals for the Willowbrook Charity Cup. Miguel had slept little, choosing instead to spend most of the night in Thunder's stall, reading softly from his poetry book until both man and horse had dozed off in the pre-dawn hours. News of Blake Johnson's hospitalization had spread throughout the equestrian community. The trainer's injuries, though not life-threatening, had been exaggerated with each retelling until Thunder was described as a beast who had nearly killed a man. The story had reached the local press, with the Willowbrook Gazette running a headline that sent chills through Miguel when Carlos showed him the paper. "Dangerous Stallion's last chance at Charity Cup. Success or euthanasia?" "They're turning it into a spectacle," Evelyn said, appearing beside Miguel as he prepared Thunder's morning feed. Her face was drawn with tension, dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting she too had passed a sleepless night. "Charles has invited every influential person in Tennessee. He's framing it as a dramatic conclusion to Thunder's rehabilitation story, either triumphant redemption or tragic necessity." Miguel nodded grimly. He wins either way. If Thunder fails, the horse is gone and the story ends cleanly. If Thunder succeeds, Charles takes credit for the Whitman method of rehabilitation, Evelyn finished, while conveniently transferring ownership to absolve himself of the abuse allegations. They worked in silence for several minutes, the weight of the day ahead pressing down on them both. Thunder sensed their anxiety, shifting restlessly in his stall, dark eyes tracking their movements with heightened awareness. "He knows something is different today," Miguel observed, noting the stallion's flared nostrils and alert ears. Evelyn approached the stall cautiously. "Will he be able to handle the crowds? The noise? There will be thousands of people there, Miguel." Before Miguel could answer, the stable doors burst open and Eleanor Henderson strode in, accompanied by a young woman carrying camera equipment. "I've brought reinforcements," Eleanor announced. "This is Sophia Chen from the Animal Welfare Institute. She'll be documenting everything today, Thunder's condition, the methods used, every aspect of his participation or non-participation." Charles's arrival minutes later created an immediate tension. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Eleanor and the photographer, but his political instincts quickly took control as he extended his hand with practiced warmth. "Eleanor, how thoughtful of you to take such personal interest in our rehabilitation program," he said smoothly, "though I don't believe we approved additional photography for today's event." Eleanor matched his false civility with her own. "This isn't for your publicity portfolio, Charles. This is evidence for our ongoing investigation." Their verbal sparring continued, but Miguel tuned it out, focusing entirely on Thunder. The stallion had begun showing signs of distress at the raised voices and unfamiliar presence, his breathing accelerating as his fight-or-flight response awakened. "Tranquilo, mi amigo," Miguel murmured, moving between Thunder and the source of tension. "They are just making noise, like the wind. It cannot touch you." By mid-morning, the Whitman estate had transformed into a spectacle of wealth and privilege. White tents dotted the manicured lawns, champagne flowed freely, and women in designer dresses and elaborate hats mingled with men in tailored suits, all discussing horses and politics with equal superficiality. In stark contrast to the celebration outside, the atmosphere in Thunder's stall was one of focused calm. Miguel had created a protective bubble around the stallion, limiting access to only those in their trusted circle. Esperanza had arrived with more of her grandmother's herbal mixture, which Miguel carefully added to Thunder's water. "It will not sedate him," she assured, watching Thunder drink. "Only soothe his spirit enough to hear your voice through the chaos." Carlos and two other workers positioned themselves strategically around the stable, forming a human barrier against unwanted intrusions. Even now, curious spectators occasionally attempted to peek at the killer horse they'd read about in the morning papers. The Latino community's support extended beyond the immediate farm workers. Throughout the morning, people Miguel had never met arrived with offerings: a hand-carved wooden charm for protection, a sprig of herbs to be worn in his pocket, a small prayer card of San Antonio, patron saint of animals. "La comunidad está contigo," an elderly man told Miguel, pressing the prayer card into his palm. "The community is with you." Evelyn arrived just before noon, having escaped her hostess duties momentarily. She wore an elegant cream-colored dress appropriate for the event, but had changed into practical boots that would allow her to move quickly if needed. "It's almost time," she said quietly. "Charles has scheduled Thunder's appearance for 1 o'clock. The height of the event when all the most important guests will be present." Miguel nodded, turning to face Thunder. The stallion stood quietly now, watching Miguel with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand far more than most humans credited. "We should prepare him," Miguel said, reaching for the light saddle they had been using in their training. Thunder accepted the saddle calmly, a testament to the trust rebuilt over the past 3 days. As Miguel tightened the girth, he spoke continuously in soft Spanish, explaining everything he was doing, treating Thunder not as a beast to be commanded, but as a partner to be respected. "Remember," Miguel told him, "today we show them who you truly are, not what they made you." At 10 minutes to 1, a farmhand arrived with Charles's instructions. Thunder was to be led to the central exhibition ring, where the announcer would introduce him as part of Charles's speech about the innovative rehabilitation programs at Whitman Acres. Miguel took a deep breath, placing his hand on Thunder's neck, feeling the strong pulse beneath the gleaming black coat. "Estamos juntos en esto," he whispered. "We are in this together." As they emerged from the stable into the sunlight, the sound hit them first. Hundreds of voices, music from the small orchestra, the clinking of glasses, all combining into a wall of noise that immediately tensed Thunder's muscles. The stallion's head rose sharply, nostrils flaring as he took in the sea of unfamiliar stimuli. Miguel maintained a steadying hand on the lead rope, neither pulling nor restricting, simply providing a constant connection. "They are just people," he said softly in Spanish. "Just like the people you know. They cannot hurt you while I am here." They moved slowly toward the exhibition ring, each step measured and deliberate. The crowd began to notice them, conversations pausing as attention shifted to the magnificent black stallion and the simply dressed man leading him. Thunder's reputation had preceded him, and people moved back instinctively, creating a wide berth. "That's the dangerous one," Miguel heard someone whisper. "The one that nearly killed a trainer." Another voice replied, "Whitman should have put him down already. Some animals can't be fixed." Miguel felt a flash of anger at the casual cruelty of the words, but kept his expression neutral, focusing entirely on maintaining Thunder's calm. The stallion's ears flicked toward the voices, but he continued forward, trusting Miguel's guidance. Evelyn had positioned herself near the entrance to the ring, her presence providing another familiar anchor for Thunder. As they approached, she stepped forward, her hand extended palm up in the greeting they had practiced hundreds of times. "Good boy, Thunder," she said softly, using the English words they had been carefully reintroducing in positive contexts. "You're doing beautifully." The stallion lowered his head slightly, accepting her touch, and Miguel felt a surge of pride. Every small victory, every moment of trust demonstrated Thunder's extraordinary resilience. The exhibition ring had been transformed into a stage, with Charles Whitman standing at a podium before the gathered elite of Tennessee society. Politicians, business leaders, celebrities, all the connections Charles had cultivated for his Senate ambitions, sat in reserved seating around the ring. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the sound system, causing Thunder to startle slightly. Miguel smoothed his hand along the stallion's neck, providing reassurance through touch. "And now, the moment many of you have been waiting for, the miracle of Willowbrook. Thunder, the undomable, guided by the revolutionary method of Mr. Charles Whitman." Charles stood beaming at the podium, arms outstretched in a politician's welcome as he prepared to claim credit for work he had not done. The spotlight operator swung the beam toward the entrance where Miguel and Thunder waited, momentarily blinding them both. Thunder reared slightly, disturbed by the sudden light, but Miguel's steady voice brought him back to earth quickly. The crowd gasped, then applauded at what they perceived as a dramatic entrance. As Miguel led Thunder into the ring, a murmur of surprise and disapproval rippled through the audience. They had expected Charles Whitman himself to present his prize stallion, not a weathered Latino worker in simple clothes. "Who is that?" whispered a woman in an enormous flowered hat to her companion. "Charles is allowing an immigrant worker to be the center of attention." Her friend leaned closer. "How inappropriate. This is supposed to be a showcase for Charles's methods." Miguel heard none of this, his focus entirely on Thunder and the challenge before them. He had brought no whip, no spurs, nothing but a simple lead rope and the trust they had built together. Charles, momentarily flustered by the unexpected development, quickly recovered his composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, as part of our innovative approach, we've had our specialist, Miguel, working closely with Thunder. Please, give him your attention as he demonstrates the progress we've made." The spotlight remained on Miguel and Thunder, creating a circle of harsh brightness that isolated them from the rest of the world. Miguel whispered once more to Thunder, then unclipped the lead rope entirely, leaving the stallion free in the ring. A collective gasp rose from the audience. After all the stories of Thunder's dangerous behavior, leaving him unrestrained seemed like madness. With soft commands in Spanish that were almost inaudible to the audience, Miguel began guiding Thunder through a series of movements. The stallion responded to cues so subtle that many observers couldn't detect them. A slight shift in Miguel's position, a quiet word, a small gesture of his hand. Thunder moved with growing confidence, his initial tension melting away as he focused entirely on Miguel, finding safety in their connection amid the chaos of the event. Together they created a dance of mutual trust that transcended the traditional handler-animal relationship. The audience, initially skeptical, fell silent in collective awe. Even those who had come expecting a spectacle of control and dominance could recognize the beauty of what they were witnessing, not subjugation, but partnership. As the demonstration concluded, Miguel stood quietly in the center of the ring, Thunder circling him at liberty before stopping to rest his head gently against Miguel's shoulder, a gesture of such profound trust that it brought tears to the eyes of more sensitive observers. The silence broke into spontaneous applause, people rising to their feet in recognition of something extraordinary. Charles hurried into the ring, eager to reclaim the spotlight, his hands raised to acknowledge the applause as if it were directed at him. "As you can see, ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming through the speakers, "our investments in the best methods." "Silence!" The command cut through the air like a blade, shocking everyone into stillness. All eyes turned toward Evelyn Whitman, who had stepped into the ring holding a leather portfolio, her face set with determination that few had ever seen in Charles's typically reserved wife. A hush fell over the gathered crowd, the silence following Evelyn's command so complete that the distant whinny of horses from the stables seemed unnaturally loud. Charles stood frozen mid-gesture, his practiced smile faltering as his wife moved deliberately toward the center of the arena, her cream-colored dress bright against the dark soil. The portfolio she clutched seemed to weigh heavier with each step she took. The Willowbrook Charity Cup had transformed the Whitman property into a spectacle of wealth and privilege. White tents dotted the manicured lawns like delicate mushrooms after rain, their peaks crowned with fluttering pennants bearing the Whitman Acres logo. Under these canopies, Tennessee's elite mingled, the women in pastel dresses and elaborate hats that cast dappled shadows across their carefully made-up faces, the men in summer suits that cost more than Miguel earned in months. Champagne flowed from crystal fountains, catching the afternoon light as it cascaded into flutes held by manicured hands. Servers in crisp white uniforms weaved through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres, too artistic to be called mere food. The air was perfumed with the scent of roses from elaborate centerpieces, mingling with expensive colognes and the earthy aroma of the horses that were, ostensibly, the reason for the gathering. Thunder stood perfectly still beside Miguel, his dark coat gleaming with health despite the weeks of mistreatment. The stallion's ears flicked toward Evelyn as she approached, but he remained calm, his trust in Miguel anchoring him against the waves of tension radiating from the humans around them. "This woman has lost her mind," muttered a lady with an enormous hat adorned with silk flowers to her companion, her voice carrying in the strange quiet that had fallen. "Charles is going to be furious," her friend whispered back, eyes wide with the delicious scandal unfolding before them. In the stands, Eleanor Henderson leaned forward, her silver hair catching the sun as she watched Evelyn with an expression of fierce approval. Beside her, Sophia Chen's camera clicked rapidly, documenting every moment of the unprecedented scene. Evelyn stopped beside Miguel and Thunder, her hand briefly touching the stallion's gleaming neck, in a gesture that spoke of genuine affection rather than the performative pats Charles had always given the horses for photographs. "This is not my husband's story to tell," Evelyn announced, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the arena without the need for microphones. Years of being the perfect political wife had taught her how to project her words, though never before had she used that skill to speak her own truth rather than Charles's carefully crafted narratives. Charles recovered quickly, striding toward his wife with a tense smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Evelyn, darling, this isn't the time for—" "This is exactly the time," she cut him off, opening the portfolio she carried. "Before you all witness what Miguel has accomplished with Thunder, You should understand what this horse has endured." From the portfolio, she removed enlarged photographs, holding them up one by one for the audience to see. The images were stark and undeniable. Thunder with bloody welts from a crop, Thunder's mouth lacerated by a severe bit, Thunder's sides marked with spur wounds. "These photographs document the innovative methods my husband authorized," Evelyn continued, her voice unwavering despite Charles's attempt to interrupt. "What you're seeing today isn't the result of the Whitman method. It's the result of one man's patience and compassion healing the damage that conventional training inflicted." A murmur ran through the crowd, the comfortable narrative they'd expected suddenly replaced by an uncomfortable truth. Several of the women who had been gossiping moments before now looked distressed, their hands unconsciously moving to cover their mouths. "This man," Evelyn said, turning to indicate Miguel, who stood quietly beside Thunder, "did not tame a wild animal. He healed a being that had been broken by human cruelty, using only patience, respect, and understanding." Thunder shifted his weight slightly, pressing closer to Miguel as if sensing that the man was being acknowledged. The stallion's dark eyes, once wild with fear, now showed an alert calmness as they moved between the humans gathered before him. Charles's face had darkened to a dangerous red, the politician's mask slipping to reveal the fury beneath. "That's enough, Evelyn," he hissed, reaching for her arm. Miguel tensed, ready to move if necessary, but Evelyn smoothly sidestepped her husband's grasp. "No, Charles, it's not enough. It's barely the beginning." She turned back to the audience, where shocked faces stared back at her. Thunder was traumatized when he witnessed his previous trainer's death. Instead of recognizing his fear, traditional trainers labeled him dangerous and used increasingly harsh methods to break him. From the corner of his eye, Miguel could see reporters scribbling furiously in notebooks. What had been planned as a puff piece about Charles Whitman's innovative horse rehabilitation program was transforming into something entirely different before their eyes. Miguel Ramirez approached Thunder differently, Evelyn continued. He recognized that behind the fear and aggression was a sensitive being seeking safety. Using gentle methods passed down through generations of horsemen in his native Mexico, he established trust rather than demanding submission. Thunder's ears pricked forward at the sound of Miguel's name, a small but noticeable response that wasn't lost on the more observant members of the audience. The stallion's intelligent awareness contradicted everything they'd heard about the dangerous, uncontrollable animal. "I've documented every step of Thunder's true rehabilitation," Evelyn said, indicating the portfolio. "These records will be made available to the Animal Protection Society and any publication interested in the truth rather than my husband's carefully constructed fiction." Charles finally snapped, grabbing Evelyn's arm with enough force to make her wince. "You've made your point, Evelyn," he said through clenched teeth. "Now stop embarrassing yourself and me before you do irreparable damage." The crowd gasped, the mask of gentility slipping to reveal the ugliness beneath. Miguel stepped forward instinctively, but before he could intervene, Thunder moved. The stallion didn't charge or show aggression. He simply positioned his massive body between Charles and Evelyn, creating a living barrier. Charles stumbled back, momentary fear flashing across his face. Thunder remained perfectly calm, his eyes fixed on Charles with an intelligence that seemed almost judgmental. "You see," Evelyn said softly, her voice carrying in the hushed arena. "He protects those who have shown him kindness. That's not a dangerous animal. That's a being with moral clarity many humans lack." Eleanor Henderson had risen from her seat, making her way down to the arena's edge. The president of the Animal Protection Society carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to confronting powerful men. "Mrs. Whitman's documentation corroborates evidence our organization has been gathering for weeks," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of official authority. "We will be launching a formal investigation into training practices at Whitman Acres and several other facilities employing similar methods." Charles looked from his wife to Eleanor, the political calculations visible behind his eyes. His reputation, his Senate aspirations, the carefully cultivated image he had built over decades, all were unraveling before the very people whose support he had courted so assiduously. "If you think that Mexican is so special," he snarled at Evelyn, abandoning any pretense of civility, "maybe you should stay with him. If he can control my horse, he can have my wife too." The cruelty of his words shocked even his closest associates, several of whom visibly recoiled. A tense silence followed the outburst. Miguel remained perfectly still, his face revealing nothing of the anger that flared within him at Charles's attempt to demean both Evelyn and himself by treating them as possessions to be discarded or claimed. When Miguel finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried clearly across the hushed arena. "No quiero su esposa, señor. Ella no es una posesión, así como Thunder tampoco lo es. Ambos merecen libertad." For a moment, confusion crossed many faces in the audience, but Esperanza, who had positioned herself near the front, translated loudly. "He says he does not want your wife, sir. She is not a possession, just as Thunder is not a possession. Both deserve freedom." The dignity in Miguel's response stood in stark contrast to Charles's crudeness. Even those who had initially looked askance at the Latino worker now regarded him with newfound respect. Evelyn's composed expression never faltered as she reached into her portfolio one final time. "Speaking of freedom, Charles, I have something for Miguel." She withdrew several legal documents, their official seals visible even from a distance. "These are the ownership papers for Thunder, transferred to Miguel's name as you promised if he succeeded today." She handed the papers to Miguel, who accepted them with genuine surprise. He had never truly believed Charles would honor that promise. "And this," Evelyn continued, producing another document, "is the deed to the small property adjacent to Whitman Acres, the old Miller place that I inherited from my father. It's yours now, Miguel, a place where broken horses can find healing." Miguel stared at the papers in his hands, momentarily speechless. The property she mentioned was small by Whitman standards, but included a modest stable, a cottage, and several acres of good pasture, more than he had ever dreamed of owning. "And as for me, Charles," Evelyn added, turning to face her husband directly, "I'm giving you something you understand very well. Divorce papers. They'll be delivered to your attorney tomorrow morning." The crowd erupted into a buzz of shocked conversations. Charles stood frozen, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, for once finding himself without words that could salvage the situation. In the midst of the chaos, Thunder remained remarkably calm, his body relaxed as he stood beside Miguel. The stallion's eyes, once wild with fear and anger, now held a steady peace that seemed to transcend the human drama unfolding around him. Miguel placed his hand gently on Thunder's neck, feeling the strong, steady pulse beneath his fingers. In this moment of unexpected triumph, he found himself thinking not of victory, but of healing, for Thunder, for himself, and perhaps even for Evelyn. "What happens now?" Miguel asked softly, looking at Evelyn. She smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face. "Now, Miguel, we begin again. Both Thunder and I have carried our chains long enough." As the crowd continued their shocked discussions, Miguel led Thunder quietly from the arena, Evelyn walking beside them. They moved away from the spotlight, away from Charles and his world of appearances and control, toward something new and undefined, but infinitely more authentic. When they reached the edge of the arena, Eleanor Henderson stood waiting, her expression serious but kind. "This won't be easy," she warned them. "Charles has powerful friends, but so do I, and truth has a way of prevailing eventually." While the attendees of the Willowbrook Charity Cup whispered and speculated behind them, Miguel, Evelyn, and Thunder walked together toward the stables, three souls united by the universal desire that bound all living creatures, the simple, profound longing to be seen, respected, and free. The trio walked in silence toward the stables, each lost in thought as the sounds of confusion behind them faded into the distance. Miguel kept one hand on Thunder's neck, the stallion's powerful muscles relaxed under his touch despite the chaos they had just navigated. Evelyn walked on Thunder's other side, her cream-colored dress now marked with dust from the arena. yet she carried herself with newfound dignity that made her appear taller, more substantial than the ornamental wife she had been mere hours ago. As they reached the quiet sanctuary of the stable, Eleanor Henderson caught up with them, slightly breathless. The president of the Animal Protection Society's face was flushed with a mixture of excitement and concern. "That was extraordinary," she said, "but we need to discuss next steps quickly. Charles won't take this public humiliation lightly." Evelyn nodded, the reality of her actions beginning to settle on her shoulders. "I've been preparing for this moment for weeks. My personal accounts are secured, and I've documented everything, not just the abuse of Thunder, but financial irregularities that Charles would prefer remain hidden." Miguel remained quiet, still processing the extraordinary turn of events. The ownership papers in his hand represented not just Thunder's freedom, but his own, a chance to build something that honored his father's legacy of gentle horsemanship. "I should return to the main arena," Eleanor said after a moment. "The press is swarming, and I want to ensure our side of the story is properly represented." She squeezed Evelyn's hand. "You were incredibly brave today." After Eleanor departed, the stable fell into contemplative silence. Thunder moved to his stall door, nickering softly at the familiar surroundings that had been both his prison and, more recently, his sanctuary. "He knows something has changed," Miguel observed, watching the stallion's relaxed posture. "We all have," Evelyn replied softly. The peace was shattered moments later when Charles burst into the stable, his face contorted with rage. 2 security guards flanked him, their expressions uncomfortable but determined. "You've made the biggest mistake of your life," Charles spat at Evelyn, his carefully cultivated public persona completely abandoned. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Those investors were crucial to my Senate campaign." Thunder immediately tensed at the hostile tone, shifting nervously in his stall. Miguel moved protectively closer to the horse, murmuring reassurances in Spanish. "I know exactly what I've done, Charles," Evelyn replied with remarkable composure. "I've told the truth after years of smiling through your lies." Charles turned his fury toward Miguel. "And you manipulated my wife as part of some scheme. What did you think would happen? That you'd end up with my property, my horse, my wife?" He laughed bitterly. "She'll tire of playing savior to the help eventually. Whitman women don't belong in stables." Miguel remained silent, refusing to be provoked. His stillness seemed to infuriate Charles further. "Get off my property," Charles demanded. "Take the horse if you must. Our agreement stands if only to be rid of you both, but I want you gone by nightfall." "The Miller property is mine to offer," Evelyn interjected calmly. "It was never part of Whitman Acres, and as of this morning, my lawyer transferred the deed to Miguel's name." Charles's face reddened further. "You've been planning this betrayal for weeks." "I've been working toward the truth," Evelyn corrected him. "There's a difference." Before Charles could respond, Sophia Chen from the Animal Welfare Institute appeared at the stable entrance, her camera raised. "Mr. Whitman, would you care to comment on the allegations of animal abuse documented in your wife's evidence?" Charles froze, instantly aware that his unfiltered rage was being recorded. With visible effort, he reassembled his public mask, straightening his tie. "My wife is experiencing emotional difficulties," he said smoothly. "The pressure of public life has been challenging for her. Any documentation she's presented has been taken out of context or manipulated. Whitman Acres maintains the highest standards of animal care." Sophia's expression remained professionally neutral. "And the photographs of Thunder's injuries? The veterinary reports confirming abuse?" "I'll be making no further comments without my attorney present," Charles replied stiffly. He turned back to Evelyn, lowering his voice. "This isn't over." With that he departed, security guards in tow. Once they were alone again, Evelyn released a shaky breath. 23 years of marriage, and I never truly stood up to him until today. Miguel nodded in understanding. Sometimes we remain in our cages long after the door has been left open. Outside, the sounds of the charity cup continued, though with a distinctly different energy. The news of Evelyn's public stance against her husband had spread through the crowd like wildfire, dividing the guests into factions, those loyal to Charles's money and influence, and those secretly pleased to see the arrogant man finally challenged. Within an hour, members of the Latino community began arriving at the stables, first Carlos and Esperanza, then others, bringing food, offers of help, and expressions of solidarity. "We heard what happened," Carlos said, gripping Miguel's hand firmly. "The whole community is talking about it. You stood up to him in front of everyone." Esperanza hugged Evelyn warmly, crossing cultural and class barriers with the simple human gesture of support. "You were so brave, Señora. So brave." As afternoon faded into evening, the impromptu gathering grew. Latino workers from neighboring farms arrived, bringing dishes wrapped in foil, thermoses of coffee, and a shared determination to help Miguel and Thunder relocate to the Miller property before nightfall. "I can drive my truck to transport Thunder," offered Javier, a landscaper from the adjacent estate. "My sons will help move your things from the trailer," added Maria, who cleaned houses for several wealthy families in the area. Evelyn watched this outpouring of community support with wonder, suddenly aware of the invisible network that had existed alongside but separate from the privileged world she had inhabited. These people, whom Charles had always referred to collectively as the Help, demonstrated more genuine humanity than she had witnessed in decades of charity galas and political fundraisers. As the group organized themselves into an efficient moving operation, Miguel took a moment to be alone with Thunder. The stallion had remained remarkably calm despite the heightened emotions and unfamiliar people, a testament to how far he had come from the traumatized animal that attacked anyone who approached. "Soon, we will have our own place," Miguel told him softly in Spanish, stroking the velvet softness of his nose. "No more people who see you as just a valuable object. No more trainers with whips and spurs." Thunder leaned into Miguel's touch, his dark eyes reflecting a trust that had been painfully earned through consistent gentleness. Miguel marveled at the resilience of the animal's spirit, how, despite the cruelty he had endured, Thunder had retained the capacity to trust again. As twilight descended, a convoy formed. Javier's truck with a borrowed horse trailer, several cars and pickup trucks loaded with Miguel's modest possessions and supplies for Thunder, and a stream of people on foot, walking the short distance to the Miller property that bordered the eastern edge of Whitman Acres. Thunder loaded into the trailer without hesitation, responding to Miguel's quiet requests, rather than force or pressure. The stallion's willingness to enter the confined space, often a trigger for previously traumatized horses, moved several onlookers to tears. "He trusts you completely," Evelyn observed, standing beside Miguel as they watched Javier carefully drive away with precious cargo. "Not completely," Miguel corrected gently. "Trust is never complete between any two beings. It is always a choice we make in each moment. Thunder chooses to trust me today. Tomorrow, we begin again." The Miller property had been vacant for years, since the death of Evelyn's father. The modest farmhouse stood solid though neglected, its white paint peeling but its bones strong. The small stable needed repairs but was structurally sound, with 4 stalls and a tack room. Most importantly, several acres of good pasture stretched behind the buildings, enclosed by an old but serviceable fence. As the convoy arrived, headlights illuminating the property in the gathering darkness, Miguel felt an overwhelming sense of homecoming, not to a place he had known before, but to a possibility he had never dared to imagine, a piece of earth that would respond to his care, a space where he could practice his father's gentle methods without interference or ridicule. The community transformed into a flurry of activity. Lanterns and flashlights appeared, illuminating the work area. Women swept out the farmhouse and set up a temporary kitchen. Men assessed the stable, making immediate repairs to ensure Thunder's stall would be safe and comfortable. Children ran errands between work groups, their excitement making the labor feel more like a celebration than a chore. As Miguel prepared Thunder's stall with fresh bedding, Evelyn appeared at his side, having changed from her elegant dress into borrowed jeans and a flannel shirt that made her look younger, more approachable. "I never knew what it felt like," she said softly, helping him spread straw. What felt like?" Miguel asked. "Community, belonging." She gestured toward the people working together outside. Charles always insisted we maintain appropriate distance from the staff. I never realized what I was missing. Before Miguel could respond, Esperanza called from outside, "Thunder's coming." They emerged to see Javier's truck pulling up to the stable entrance. When the trailer door opened, Thunder stepped down calmly, his ears pricked forward with interest at the new surroundings. He surveyed the unfamiliar property with intelligent curiosity rather than fear. "Welcome home, Thunder," Miguel said, stroking the stallion's gleaming neck. For a moment, horse and man stood silently together, framed in the lantern light against the backdrop of their new beginning. Then Thunder did something that made the gathered crowd gasp softly. He lowered his proud head and rested it gently against Miguel's chest in a gesture of such profound trust and affection that it transcended the boundaries between species. "Por que meu pai dizia sobre cavalos?" Miguel murmured in Portuguese, the language of his childhood that he rarely used. "They are mirrors of our souls. They show who we truly are, not who we pretend to be." Evelyn watched this moment of connection with tears in her eyes, understanding that she was witnessing something sacred, not just between Miguel and Thunder, but within herself. Standing there in borrowed clothes, surrounded by people who had been invisible to her for decades, she felt more authentic, more present in her own life than she had in 23 years of marriage. As the community gathered for a late meal in the farmhouse yard, sharing food and stories under the stars, Evelyn sat beside Miguel on the porch steps, watching Thunder graze peacefully in his new paddock. "Thunder taught us something more important," she said quietly, echoing Miguel's earlier thought. "That even the most broken souls can be healed when they find someone willing to listen to their pain." The golden light of early autumn bathed the rolling hills of the Rancho Esperanza, transforming the modest property into something almost magical in the late afternoon glow. 1 year had passed since the dramatic events at the Willowbrook Charity Cup, 1 year of healing, building, and transformation that had touched not just Thunder and Miguel, but an entire community. Miguel stood on the crest of a small hill, watching Thunder lead a small herd of 5 other horses across the lush pasture. The once traumatized stallion moved with the confident grace of a natural leader, his coat gleaming obsidian against the emerald grass. Occasionally he would pause to wait for a limping chestnut mare, the newest rescue, still cautious and uncertain after years of neglect, gently nudging her forward when she hesitated. "He remembers what it feels like," Miguel murmured to himself, "to be afraid and alone." From this vantage point, he could see the transformation of the Miller property. The farmhouse gleamed with fresh white paint, its porch adorned with hanging plants and comfortable chairs where visitors often gathered in the evenings. The stable had been expanded from 4 stalls to 8, with a covered arena attached for working with horses during inclement weather. A hand-carved wooden sign hung above the entrance, "Rancho Esperanza, where broken souls find peace." Esperanza appeared beside him, carrying 2 mugs of steaming coffee. At 72, she had become something of a grandmother figure at the ranch, dividing her time between her job at the Hendersons and her self-appointed role as the ranch's spiritual guardian. "They're hanging the new sign today," she said, handing Miguel a mug. "Carlos and the boys finished carving it last night." Miguel nodded gratefully, both for the coffee and the news. The community's investment in Rancho Esperanza had never wavered. What began as an emergency relocation had evolved into a collective project that brought together the scattered Latino workers from farms throughout the county. "We should gather everyone before sunset," Miguel said. "I want them all to be there when we hang it." As they turned back toward the buildings, the sound of a car coming up the gravel drive caught their attention. Evelyn's practical blue pickup truck appeared, dust billowing behind it. Unlike the luxury vehicles she once rode in as Charles Whitman's wife, the truck represented her new life, functional, unpretentious, connected to the earth. She parked beside the farmhouse and emerged carrying a stack of veterinary journals and a bag of groceries. Her transformation over the past year had been as remarkable as Thunder's. Her honey blonde hair, once highlighted and perfectly styled, now fell in a simple braid down her back. Her face, freed from the heavy makeup she'd worn as a political wife, had developed a healthy tan from days spent outdoors. The haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by purpose. The new medical supplies arrived at the clinic, she called as she approached, and I picked up more of that liniment that worked so well on Estrella's leg. Evelyn had returned to veterinary school, completing the degree she had abandoned when she married Charles. Now in her final year, she split her time between classes, a part-time position at a local clinic, and the ranch. Her expertise complemented Miguel's intuitive approach, creating a rehabilitation program that had begun to attract attention from equine specialists across the state. Inside the farmhouse, the main room had been converted into a combination office and classroom. Charts of equine anatomy hung on the walls alongside photographs documenting the recovery of various horses. A large whiteboard displayed a schedule of visits, treatments, and training sessions. What had begun as a sanctuary for Thunder had evolved into a recognized rehabilitation center for traumatized and abused horses. "I had a call from the Wilkins case," Evelyn said, setting down her bags. "The court awarded custody of the horses to the rescue organization. They want to bring 2 of the worst cases here next week." Miguel nodded thoughtfully. Their reputation had grown steadily, largely through word of mouth. The Miguel method, as some had taken to calling it, was becoming known among a network of rescue organizations as particularly effective with severely traumatized animals. "Are they very damaged?" he asked. "The mayor hasn't allowed human touch in months," Evelyn replied. "The gelding charges anyone who enters his space." "They will find peace here," Miguel said simply. By late afternoon, the ranch came alive with activity as members of the community arrived after finishing their work at neighboring farms. Young men from 5 different counties who had been learning Miguel's gentle methods gathered in the training arena, where he demonstrated techniques for approaching frightened horses using body language rather than force. "Remember," he told the attentive group, "always ask, never tell. A request honors their dignity. A demand only teaches fear." The young men nodded, some taking notes. Several had already begun applying these principles at the farms where they worked, gradually influencing the training methods used throughout the region. In another corner of the property, Esperanza led a group of children in preparing carrots and apples for the horses. She wove traditional stories into the activity, teaching them that respect for animals had been part of their cultural heritage long before they came to this country. "Mi abuela always said that animals see our intentions before our actions," she told them, demonstrating how to hold an apple flat on the palm to offer it safely. "They know who comes with love and who comes with demands." As sunset approached, the community gathered in the central yard for the ceremony of hanging the new sign. Carlos and his sons had spent weeks carving the large wooden plaque that would officially mark the ranch's transition from private sanctuary to community healing center. Miguel looked around at the assembled faces: farm workers, housekeepers, gardeners, and their families, alongside veterinary students, local rescue volunteers, and even a few progressive ranchers who had become interested in gentler training methods. The artificial barriers of language, class, and culture that had once seemed so impenetrable had grown permeable here, connections forming around the shared commitment to healing. Eleanor Henderson arrived just as they were preparing to hang the sign, her silver hair catching the late afternoon light. Now a regular visitor and staunch supporter, she had brought Thunder's story to the state legislature as part of a successful campaign for stricter enforcement of animal welfare laws. "I brought a special guest," she announced, helping a small figure from her car. A young girl with leg braces and a tentative smile looked around nervously at the gathered crowd. "This is Lucia," Eleanor explained. "She's been reading about Thunder in the school program we started. She asked if she could meet him." Miguel felt his heart constrict at the name, the same as his daughter's. But he smiled warmly at the child. "Thunder would be honored to meet you, Lucia." As Carlos and his sons hung the beautifully carved sign above the ranch entrance, Miguel led Lucia and Eleanor to the paddock where Thunder grazed. The stallion raised his head at their approach, ears pricked forward with interest rather than alarm. After a year at Rancho Esperanza, Thunder had developed a remarkable ability to distinguish between those who posed threats and those who came with open hearts. He's so big, Lucia whispered, holding tightly to her crutches. Yes, but very gentle, Miguel assured her. Would you like to say hello to him? The girl nodded hesitantly. Miguel showed her how to stand quietly, letting Thunder make the choice to approach. The stallion studied them for a long moment, then walked slowly to the fence, his movements deliberate and calm. Hold your hand like this, Miguel demonstrated, palm flat and open. Let him smell you first. That is how horses learn who you are. Lucia followed his instructions, her small hand trembling slightly as Thunder stretched his neck over the fence. The great black nostrils flared gently, taking in her scent. Then, with exquisite gentleness, Thunder lowered his head and allowed the child to touch his forehead. He likes you, Miguel said softly, watching the girl's face transform with wonder. The moment touched everyone watching. Eleanor wiped away a tear, and several of the community members crossed themselves in silent acknowledgement of something sacred unfolding before them. In Thunder's gentle acceptance of this vulnerable child, they saw the fullest expression of the healing that had occurred within him. Later, as twilight deepened into evening and stars began to appear in the clear Tennessee sky, the community shared a meal at long tables set up in the yard. The food represented the diverse backgrounds of those gathered. Tamales and empanadas alongside cornbread and peach cobbler, the flavors mingling just as the cultures had. Miguel noticed Evelyn deep in conversation with a visiting equine specialist from the university, her hands moving animatedly as she explained their holistic approach to rehabilitation. The woman she had become in the past year, confident, purposeful, connected to her own values, bore little resemblance to the shadow who had lived in Charles Whitman's mansion. As the evening progressed, someone brought out guitars and music filled the yard. Children chased fireflies while adults sang songs from their homelands, Mexican corridos mingling with Appalachian folk tunes in an improvised harmony that somehow worked despite its unlikely components. Miguel slipped away quietly, walking to the paddock where Thunder stood watching the gathering. The stallion nickered softly in greeting, stretching his neck over the fence to touch Miguel's shoulder with his muzzle. Quite a celebration, eh? Miguel said softly in Spanish. All because of you, mi amigo. A gentle footstep behind him announced Evelyn's presence. She had also stepped away from the gathering, drawn to the peaceful presence of the horse who had changed both their lives. I received a letter today, she said, coming to stand beside Miguel at the fence. From a rehabilitative riding center in Kentucky. They've heard about our work and want to send staff to learn our methods. Miguel nodded, absently stroking Thunder's neck. Your studies are almost complete. You could establish a proper clinic here with scientific backing for what we do. Our methods, she corrected gently. Science and intuition together. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge above the celebration. Thunder remained beside them, occasionally nudging one or the other, as if to include himself in their quiet communion. You know what my father used to say about horses, Miguel said finally, his eyes on the distant hills where more rescued horses would soon graze. That they are mirrors of our soul. They show who we really are, not who we pretend to be. Evelyn smiled, reaching out to touch Thunder's velvet muzzle. Thunder taught us something even more important, she said softly. That even the most broken souls can be healed when they find someone willing to listen to their pain. As night fell completely over Rancho Esperanza, the soft relinchar of thunder echoed like a confirmation, a whisper of hope for all wounded creatures still waiting for understanding and a chance to begin again.